Hi. You may be wondering to yourself where I've been for the past couple of weeks. Well, let me give you a quick explanation. Now this is an Asus Strix 2080 Ti, and that is a jack. Now, I bought this 2080 Ti from SideX PCs, and it served me pretty well for about 3 months until it exploded within my PC. I don't have any actual footage of this happening, but here's a dramatic reenactment of what happened.
What the fuck?
Yeah, something like that. So, this exploded. I contacted ZyDex PCs and I was like, hey, it exploded. I need another one. And they sent one right out. Now, they sent me this MSI Duke affair over here. And it's a 2080 Ti. It's the same graphics card, but this one has a little bit more oomph to it, but they didn't have another Asus Strix model, so I just went with the MSI one. But clearly, it was quite a devastating affair. When my MSI card got here, it was bent up like a pretzel. Like, the I/O shield on the back was all bent up. This tab was like all bent over to the side, and all my shielding was twisted, and it still kind of sags inside of my PC, but it works. It works perfectly fine. Instead of, while I was waiting for the packing label or shipping label for this Strix model, I decided why not make a YouTube video of me tearing into this thing and figure out what happened. So let's do it. So when you're pulling apart these GPUs, what I like to do first is get rid of the screws that aren't actually holding the cold plate to the GPU itself. So I usually start with about like right here, and I take these ones out, and then I don't own a mod mat, but what I like to do is find a place on my mouse mat and just kind of replicate where they were. Also, it's a good idea to disconnect the fans from the PCB itself and whatever LEDs might be attached to the, the shroud. So that way when you pull it apart, there's less wires that you have to remove after the fact. So once you've gotten these two out and you've got your fan headers out, we can remove the screws from the cold plate. And these are spring-loaded screws. And that way you know exactly which ones went and held the actual GPU down, or held the cold plate down onto the GPU, because they're the only ones that are going to be spring-loaded like that. On the newer NVIDIA cards, there is an actual like full-sized spring-loaded retention plate, but it serves about the same purpose. It just has a little bit more resistance on it. So we've got everything off of the back here, which means that our fan shroud and our actual heatsink should be ready to just come off. Yep, and that's it right there. So here on this side, we have our heat fins, and you can even see right here on the actual heatsink itself. I don't know if the camera can pick that up too well, but there are scorch marks on the heatsink. So it exploded in such a way that it actually scorched the heatsink above it. And you can see here is the actual part that failed. Right here. And if Buildzoid's anything to go by, this is the 12 volt power balance, or one of the two 12 volt power balances. This one here, and I believe this cluster over here is also a 12 volt power balance. And then here's your shunts for each of the 8-pin power connectors. Thermal pad here for our VRM components, which, as you can also see how it's slightly damp on top of the on top of those SMDs right there. That leads me to believe that these, at least some of these, were shorted. The dry ones, I believe, would be the ones that are shorted. Usually when something like this goes bad on a PCB, it's usually these ones here that are the first to go. So this is a bracket that's supposed to act as like another heatsink for the memory and these components here, and it also holds as like a skeleton or a brace for the GPU so it doesn't sag. This will remove the backplate and this little skeleton in here, and we're just gonna kind of line them up where they came off. If you do this kind of stuff a lot, Gamers Nexus makes a mod mat that you can use that's gridded, so you can place all of your screws on like a little gridded mat, so you know exactly where they go, back with like a picture of a GPU on the other side of the grid, so you can kind of map everything out and figure out where everything went. This part here coming up is important for if you plan on putting it back together and you didn't necessarily buy like extra thermal pads, because this thermal pad is actually quite robust. This one right here usually comes off still stuck to the heatsink, so you don't have to like peel it off of the actual SMDs or components, and it's pretty strong, so it doesn't fall apart when you take it off or reapply it or anything like that. But if you do not have any extra thermal pads, then it would be a good idea to do the removal process very carefully. And these parts here that hold the IO shield in place, they're all relatively the same. What I usually do, I remove all of these first, and then once I have the IO shield off, I just place the screws back into the IO shield, and then when I want to put the IO shield back on later, they're all right where they came. Some of these IO shield screws are tapered, like this small cluster over to the right, and then some of them are not tapered. You want to make sure the tapered ones go back into the tapered holes, etc., etc. And then you got the tiny little one for the USB-C. Make sure you have a very small screwdriver so you don't strip it. Your IO shield comes off, and you can place these back basically into the holes that they came out of. And you can see which ones are tapered and which ones aren't. These two here above these two display ports are not tapered, so these go in here, and all the rest of these have that little wedge shape on them on both the hardware and the shield, so you can just put them all like that. And then you lift it up so you keep all of your hardware in place, and then put that to the side safely. So now you've got all that done, you can now remove the little skeleton. Be very careful because the thermal plate or the thermal pads are stuck. You don't want to twist and you don't want to lift off with too much force, because if you twist too much or lift off with too much force, you can pull some of the surface mounted devices off of the PCB and then you'll have a bricked card. You don't want that. Alright, so as you can see here, on the other side of here, you have a thermal pad that goes across each memory module, and then you get apparently one that's stuck to a memory module. There we are. That tore a little bit, but that would still kind of be usable. But this card is bricked anyway, so it doesn't really matter if these are still usable, but you want to make sure that these are all in relatively good shape. If not, you have replacements for them when you do put it back together. But be very careful when removing those. You want to try and get them off. If you're reusing them, you want to try to get them off in one piece so that they can go right back on where they came off. And here you have your PCB. Actually, on the other side, you'll have your backplate. And the backplate, at this point, will be held on by literally one LED plug. You can pull off just like that with a pair of tweezers or with your hands if you've got the dexterity for it. And here we are. So, here is where our critical failure took place. I cleaned it up a little bit, but you can see here where one particular SMD literally blew apart in half. Like, that is no longer there. So in order for this board to be repaired, this entire surface mount device would have to be replaced, which is something that I can't do from home. I don't even have a soldering iron that can get into something that small and that precise. But everything else looks a little charred and burnt, but that's not to say that it is done. It probably is done, but that surface mount device right there that blew in half, that's going to be our failure point. So whatever happened here, which was probably overvolting, somehow this card managed to overvolt, blow that capacitor up, and send way too much power through that. It popped to try and save the GPU, but I can see here from some of the marks left from the thermal pad that it looks like these three may have shorted, and possibly these four may have shorted as well. But there's no way for me to tell without a power probe and a good amount of my time. On the other side of the PCB, it doesn't look like much spectacular happened on this side. This is where that cluster let go. It doesn't seem like anything on this side of the PCB was affected, at least on a surface level. And the same here for these. There is like a wet spot right here. I don't know what caused that, but on this side of the PCB it actually looks quite good. So now we can take a second to clean off and take a look at our actual GPU die. I use the Arctic Clean stuff that usually comes with like Arctic Silver thermal paste. It's usually very good for cleaning up dyes and stuff like that. And if you're going to do this, I wouldn't suggest using a microfiber cloth like what I'm using. But as soon as this card is bricked, it doesn't really matter if I mess anything up. But a microfiber cloth like this, if you're not careful or diligent, you can pull some of the SMDs off of around the actual GPU die here. And if you were to do that, that's that's a big good game. You just want to be careful and gentle with it. Now this stuff is alcohol based, so even if it does seep over onto the die itself or onto the PCB, or if you're working with a CPU onto the substrate or on a motherboard, if it leaks onto the actual PCB of the motherboard, it doesn't matter because it's alcohol based. It'll dry right up and it's not going to affect anything. Just don't start anything up while it is still wet. You want to make sure that if you do clean off a die with this stuff, that you don't start it up while it is still wet. Now, as far as I know, or as far as I understand, TU102 is the GPU. 300A is the model of GPU that it's going into. So like a 2060, 2070, 2080, or 2080 Ti. 300A would be 2080 Ti. K1 is the missing memory module that you'll have. These PCBs are made, it's like a cookie cutter. So it's made with the space for the highest end card. So it'd be like an RTX Titan would have this populated right here, because it has more onboard memory than the 2080 Ti. The 2080 Ti has 11 gigabytes. So it has one missing memory module. And that, from what I know from Gamers Nexus, that K1 tells you which memory module is missing, because it's for each, what I assume is each AIB, it'll have a different missing memory module. And then the A1 is the revision of the GPU. So this is probably an earlier GPU, but the actual memory here, early on in the 2080 Ti's lifespan, when they first came out, it had Micron memory modules. And the Micron memory modules were having a problem with early degrading and artifacting and bricking cards. So they switched to Samsung memory modules. So this is clearly a newer iteration of the 2080 Ti with the Samsung memory modules here. And an early model high binned GPU die. So that's actually what that is. Probably the binning process is A1. I'm not entirely sure. These are your power stages right here and right here. And these are your VMEM power stages. So you've got 3 VMEM power stages, which powers your VMEM, and then you've got these power stages here that power your VRMs on either side. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 power stages for your GPU. And this actually is the 2080 Ti model with, well, one of the AIBs with the highest amount of these power stages. Whereas the MSI Duke that I have, that only has 13. As you can see here, there's 2 that are turned to the side. And the reason for that is Asus made a water-cooled or partially water-cooled model of the 2080 Ti, and in order to get the pump to fit on the die and over the memory, they had to turn these 2 power stages a little bit so that the pump could fit over everything without getting in the way. So that was a good bit of foresight from Asus there. That's the Asus Strix ROG 2080 Ti. That's where mine failed. And I wouldn't be surprised if it took out a whole bunch of other stuff with it. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't take the GPU out with it. Now, I hope you learned something in our little journey today. And I hope you figured out something that you didn't know before, and you have a little fire burning in there for GPUs and other computer parts that are built in the same fashion and are just as intriguing and interesting to look at It's 6 a.m. I've been up all night making and editing this video. So I'm going to get some sleep and put together some other videos for you guys to watch on this channel now that I have a working computer again. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing, like, comment, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ta-ta for now, my dudes.
Hey, it's me. It's been a while. This is about sending you a look. Can you do a close-up for me? I'm dead! Thanks, Hanzo! Dang it! Oh, no! Looks like, dude. Fuck! No! Gunny? Get up there! Touch that! Oh!
On the back and see it from behind. This way. Got him! Fucking mouth. Watch out, Nismo!